I'm interested in trying to help people understand how better to protect themselves as average citizens. And in doing that study, basically, to make a long story short, it came evident to me there's a difference between what most people do to protect themselves, which is self-defense, and the concept of protection, which there is a difference. And the difference is pretty much that protection is preventive in nature, and self-defense is reactionary in nature. And most of what people are doing today that they think might protect them is self-defense, when in fact they need to be focusing on protection or the preventive aspects of it, not the reactionary self-defense aspect. So I've kind of evolved that philosophy over the last 10 years, and as I'm looking at what's going on today, particularly in schools right now, since we're talking about schools, I see that their mentality, their approach to dealing with something like a lone shooter or a terrorist attack really is focused more on self-defense and a lot less on protection. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Let's take some examples. In a recent shooting here, a guy walked in to the classroom and literally shot 2 people dead. Okay, and he walked down the hall and did this. So here's the dilemma with the school environment, and that is, yes, when the shooting starts, the training they're receiving now is from law enforcement and the security, quote, security professional people. And these people are good at that stuff. And they're teaching them to, shut the door, lock the school down, jump under a desk, put something that'll stop a bullet between you, like a table, between you and the person who's shooting, who might come into your room. And I understand that, and if it gets to that point, those are certainly things that can save lives. There's no question. But when it comes to whether, and really what happened, let me just step back a little bit, what happened on the news media broadcast that led me to want to do this Facebook Live video is, the principal on there was going, we did what we were supposed to do. We sent people in, they got under the desk, they got into, and this was an incident, by the way, where the guy actually crashed through a fence, went up into sort of a horseshoe area where the buildings came around and just opened fire on the building. Okay, and the bullets went through the walls of the building. They were sort of modular kinds of buildings. No one was killed, and according to this principal, no one was killed because they responded like they should have. They went on lockdown, they got on the floor underneath their tables, and they hid from bullets. Well, I don't know. I think divine intervention might have been more prominent there. But the fact is, the guy got in. He crashed through the gate. He got out of his vehicle and he emptied several rounds into these buildings and was never challenged up to that point, and was able to break through. Another situation is one that I actually saw on YouTube the other day, where a man walked into the office. He actually walked into the school, went up to the office, and he was known as one of the teacher's husbands. And it was an estranged relationship, but he was known to be her husband and asked to see her, and the receptionist had him sign the book like he's supposed to, so they've got on there that he was in the building. He literally walked through the doors, walked down the hall, walked in, shot his ex-wife and a student, and he was calm. You couldn't see that he had a weapon on him. He didn't appear agitated. And this lady let him in there. And what the commentator was saying in this newscast that I saw was, this is no way to know this guy was going to do this by any of the people there. Therefore, you couldn't stop it. And I beg to differ. You could have stopped it had you thought through the process of determining the kinds of threats that can come in and what are the potential things. In this one particular incident, just one feature might have prohibited that shooting. And the feature was, before you can go back and see anybody, first of all, the door wasn't locked going from the office into the school. And so he walked in, an outside door, walked into the office, no locks on any of those doors, and then when he signed in, he walked through an unlocked door into the school. So first of all, locks on all those doors and questions prior to a person coming into the building would have possibly prevented that. Then a second feature might have been, after he signed in, she could have told him to have a seat. She was going to call the teacher and alert her to the fact that he was here and wanted to see her. And I'm pretty sure that teacher would have said, do not let that man in the door. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about when it comes to protection versus self-defense. And protection is proactive. People who tend to do this, for example, do it well, are the Secret Service. When you talk to Secret Service agents, and I've talked to a couple of them, and I ask them, what is your role and job? And the first thing out of their mouth is to protect the president. They don't say to defend the president. Because if they're having to defend the president, that means the president's under attack. And there isn't any of them that I've talked to who said that they would have not failed in their mission if the president came under attack. Even though it's very hard to predict who's going to be in a crowd with a gun or anything like that, they really pride themselves on doing a lot of pre-work wherever the president goes to kind of prevent anybody coming in. And certainly, you want a self-defense mental attitude about you at times, because you can't, there's nothing that'll guarantee 100% you can't get through. But the fact that you focus on just that and not the protective aspects of it is what the problem is. And for example, let's take a school and the fact that these people got through without being checked by an armed guard. So another, by the way, another tool that could have been used by that school for that guy that shot his wife was, if you had an armed security guard in the building, the armed security guard could have asked the man if he had come to the office, came through the door, not letting him in to the schoolroom, in the office said, do you have any weapons? Do you have anything on you? Do you mind lifting your coat, turning around? Thank you very much. Okay, now I will walk you to the teacher's office. There's a lot more protection right there. I'm guessing that guy would have been caught long before he got to that teacher. So these are the philosophies we need to ingrain in our schools. We need to move their mental attitude or their culture from being one of reactionary and self-defense and spending their money in training in that area and putting into gear a more protection-oriented culture. And that, I mean, trying to understand how to prevent someone from even getting on the school grounds. I have, in the military, we were trained, when you go out in the field and you set up a base camp and you set up perimeters for protection for the people who are resting. So you send out guards further out away from the base camp to detect anybody who might be coming into the base camp before they get to the main force. Sometimes they'd lay out tripwires, or if you trip them, they'd send off signals and flares. You probably saw that in the movies. But the idea is there is a perimeter defense first. And if that perimeter defense is broached, then there are other perimeter defenses. And so there's sort of a layered defense factor before anybody would get to the main group. And that's the way schools need to think. That's how you as an individual need to think about your protection too. You need to think about the fact that you are, just to focus on you a minute, you need to think about the fact you don't just live in your home. Okay, you go to work, you take your children to school or your children are in school. You go to the mall, you go to restaurants, you go to movie theaters, you go to a variety of places where large groups of people are that are often perceived as what terrorists and lone shooters call soft targets. Easy targets, people who are distracted, not paying attention, normally not armed. In some cases, restaurants and businesses have signs that say they don't want you armed in their establishment because of business purposes. You think about that process of protecting yourself. You need to start realizing you start in your home and you work your way out. But even within the home, for example, the inside, your bedroom, for example, is a core area. That's where you live. That's where you're at. Maybe it's the living room or whatever. And then as you move out to the outer walls of that house, you have cameras on the outside shooting out. And you might even have motion sensor alarms on there that send off an alarm signal in the house in case a sensor is broken. The signal between sensors is broken, so that you know something is moving outside of your house that's normally not out there. Okay, and then you can take, and that would just be outside, maybe your porch or just outside of your house in the front part of your yard. Then you can take that perimeter further and fence your yard or fence your property in and put on the property motion detector sensors and CCTV cameras that alert you some way to look and see what's going on out there. Why do you want that? Because if you want to be able to stop that person the farthest potential distance away from the inner core target as possible. Okay, so when you think about schools, you ask yourself, and you go ask this question. You go to your school and you ask this question. Is your school fenced in? In other words, if it's a city block, is all of that city block fenced in with a fairly high fence that would be hard to penetrate? Do you have cameras or sensors on the perimeter of those fences? Something that will actually show you someone is trying to climb that fence or get through that fence or get through that gate that's in that fence that's locked. And an alarm that would send somebody up and say, hey, look, somebody's trying to penetrate the farthest extreme from our school on our property, but it's ours, and somebody's trying to penetrate it. And then you would move that in closer to, say, the parking lot areas and the actual playgrounds for the kids and the outlying buildings, etc., that are around the school. And you begin to see if anyone is penetrating there. Okay, and then to get people in and out of the school like they're supposed to, you would have pretty much like most military posts have. And by the way, there have been very few penetrations of our military posts, virtually none. If people were killed on a military post, it's usually by someone who is in the military or some sort of crime. But in terms of breaking into or running the blockade or something like that, unless it's in Afghanistan, and even then it was those people who were killed over in Afghanistan, and I think it was the last year or 2 years, were, they believed the person coming in there were friendlies. So they made a mistake. But they have these sort of concrete barriers that are staggered, and you have to kind of drive through them like this. That's very difficult to ram or penetrate quickly. And then what you come up on is an armed guard security environment that says, I need your ID that this school has issued you. I need to see that and validate against what I have on my list here. And if the picture doesn't match the person, then they don't get in. So it would be the parent's responsibility to make sure if a grandparent or a brother or sister or someone else is going to pick that person up, that picture was sent to the school and they had an authorization to do that. Otherwise, they don't get in. They just don't get in to get the children. Okay, and you can do that with the school bus also. The school bus can come through and the person can identify the driver as someone who's supposed to pick someone up, and then once they leave, they're out of the school area. But within the book I have, I get these ideas. The few that I just mentioned to you really came up from using a technique in my book that's called threat assessment. And threat assessments can be very difficult and complicated. Like the president's threat assessment is extremely costly. It costs millions of dollars to have the president's pre-worked environment. In other words, where they go to a hotel or they look at routes and they look at all the buildings along the route and they identify and put up snipers and stuff on top of roofs with the police department and the sheriff's department and the state patrol and state investigative agencies and all this wherever he happens to be going. Every person is ID'd and checked in every hotel, and if there's anybody in there that doesn't check out, they're asked not to show up that day to work or whatever. So these are things that are done in advance that are extremely expensive and costly. But for the average person, you can pretty much, or even for a school, for example, you can pretty much complete your own threat assessment by trying to identify potential things that cause a threat to you or your children or the loved ones or people who you know. You can do it for your home. You can do it for work. You can do it for your children's school. And this is where I tell parents, you need to be clear. The responsibility for your child's safety and security ultimately rests in your hands. If you choose not to get involved, if you choose not to ask the questions, you can't be guaranteed at all in any way, shape, or form that your children are safe and secure in your school. When is the last time you asked, how do you background bus drivers? Okay? What is the depth of that background check? Did you just check locally? Do you just check driver records? Do you check criminal records? Is it just local, or do you go multiple state, or do you do a national FBI criminal background check? Okay, and in each of those encompasses a level of cost as you go up the ladder. But ask yourself, you're sending your child onto a bus with a driver who, frankly, you don't know anything about, to be honest with you. So you're counting on the school doing that. Well, there are plenty of instances where schools have found out later that people were pedophiles driving, they had drunk driving records, in many cases their license was suspended, and they simply didn't check thoroughly enough to understand this. Now, and by the way, this is not their profession. This is not the school's profession. Although it's getting to be part of their job performance rating, so to speak. So when you go in there, you can ask your school, what is the process for getting in to see a student or getting in to see a teacher? How does that work? And frankly, if you can literally walk in the front door of the school, you have a problem immediately. Okay? If you can get in that school without being buzzed in, you have a problem with protection right off the bat. So, because just about anybody can walk in there. Once they get in there and they can get in the office, they can shoot up the place, push whatever buttons they need to get into the school. So, if the outside perimeter is not protected while kids are in the playground, someone can, in fact, get on that playground and commit an atrocity right there on the playground. So, it also requires you to ask questions like, are you working with the community surrounding the school? Because you have that perimeter that's just inside your school, but then outside of that, just outside of that, you have the neighborhood that's around it. Are you working with the neighborhood? Do you bring them into meetings and say, hey, look, we need your help. If you see somebody out standing next to the fence in our school, here's the number to call. Call us and we will have the police come and investigate this person right away. And maybe they're doing nothing, and that's fine. But if someone's hanging around the school ground on the outside of the fence just looking in, and they keep coming consistently to do that, chances are that's somewhat abnormal, and it's better to check it and be safe than sorry. If you know of people who are within the community who could be liable to the children, who have records, large records of arrest or whatever, it's nice to have that information. And that's where the police department involved with the community can get involved. They can tell you who around that area have criminal records. Those are, once a criminal has a felony record, that's a public record. The police can help the school identify, those, and those pictures can come up on the media. And you can pull them up on the internet and look at them. In addition to that, for example, schools are very much like churches, and I spent a little time going through a couple of churches, and churches are notorious soft targets. That the last thing in the world they want is that feeling that you have to be discriminated against or checked to get into the church. And I understand that, and there are probably ways to deal with that, but a lot of churches have security cameras. They have them panning. One of the churches I talked to, they had security cameras panning the parking lots. They had security cameras on the doors. They had security cameras in the classrooms where the kids were. They had a tremendous amount of money invested in CCTV cameras, and no single person was watching those cameras during the time that people were coming and going from church. Okay, which is interesting to me, because what that tells me is the purpose of the security camera is really self-defense. It's really post-attack. We'll be able to capture them after they do something. Now, if you're relying on the fact that those cameras are visible to everybody on the outside, you need to know most terrorists, most criminals, most lone shooters who do their homework, and nearly all of them do their homework. They have a plan. They have a structured method of operation of planning these situations. And if you want to know what that is, you can find that on my book. And I'll post that across this video and in my Facebook comments down here, where you can go read my book. And in my book is the method of operation they use, and there's a breakdown in the book of every one of those methods, and when you're most likely to be able to see in advance that somebody is planning something and maybe stop it before they even get to executing it. So, but the idea here is if you have security cameras, and if you're in a school or a church, and during that period of time where people are coming into and leaving and are there, if you have no trained individual looking at those cameras the whole time, every second those cameras are operating when people are vulnerable, then they are useless to you from a protection standpoint. They may help the police catch them. They may show everything that goes on as it's going on, and unfortunately we get to see that on the news when it happens. But no one stopped it because they saw someone on the outer perimeters of the schoolyard come over the fence and start walking towards the school, which, had they been seen doing that on a camera, the person could have got on the radio call to the armed police officer or officers who are in charge of guarding that school that day, and said there's a person that just jumped the fence on the northwest quarter of the fence and they're moving towards the building. They would have been confronted far away from the school. And so this is the important aspect that I'm trying to convince people to look at, and not just be focused, and not take it seriously. Don't slight this, because every time I see a newscast after an incident's happened, everybody goes, "I am so surprised this happened here." And that makes me so upset, because why are they surprised? There is an untold amount of publicizing of these events on media. You know they're happening. You know the environment's changed. You absolutely know this can happen to you. And yet, you just don't think it will. The other factor that's involved here is cost. And if you do a threat assessment takes each threat, breaks it down into high, medium, and low threats, the likelihood it'll happen, if it does happen, the severity that it'll happen, and that puts a threat level to it. And then once you have your threats identified in high priority to low priority, you put them into an action plan with some dates and times and resources and budgeting and costs that you need to deal with that. So it's kind of outlined, and you can begin to get to your maximum protection as soon as possible, because you have a plan, you have it organized. It is a strategy. It is part of your mindset or culture that goes along. I know, you have a mindset or culture in a school that sciences are important to educate, math, reading, and the sciences are important to educate children today. That's a culture. That's an environment. Well, part of getting them to that point is providing them an environment where they don't have to worry about anything else. And contrary to what we felt would go on if we didn't protect students, and that is, if we didn't put armed guards in schools, if we didn't put up barriers to entry to school, if we didn't search people as they came into the school, if we didn't do all this, people would have a more relaxed and enjoyable learning environment. Frankly, it's getting to be just the opposite. It means that they're vulnerable. And so they are, part of what they do when they go to school is worry about this. So these are things you need to be aware of that are going on out there right now. You need to stay focused on, as a parent, holding your schools accountable. Go listen to my book, and then do your own threat assessment. Even get some neighbors together and sit down and brainstorm through the process. Identify the things that need to be asked of your school and your school administration about the safety and security of your children, because we need to start protecting kids now and not defending them against an attack. Defending leaves a very, very sad scenario. It's normally a lose-lose situation. So if we can prevent that, we can at least have a situation where kids feel like they're comfortable. They don't have to worry about that part in their life, and they can conduct their normal school activities. And there's a lot of things that you're going to have to discuss, and the school has to be accountable for. It's going to require a lot of help from both teachers, our administration, staff, teachers, parents, relatives of parents, and students for that matter. So it's an integrated, highly resourced approach to keeping your kids safe at school. So I just wanted to say this. I hope you pass this on to your friends. Get thinking about certainly what I want you to do is go to my website at www.reducethreats.com. And on there is a page called audiobook. Click on that and listen to the book. I encourage you to listen to it from the beginning to the end, because the chapters are highly integrated and build on each other. But you'll learn a whole lot about questions you need to ask, not only the school and your kids, but about your home and your protection for your loved ones, and about other places you go, like work and church, and the businesses you have, and all of these places I named: churches, restaurants, nightclubs, schools, work, malls. All of these places have had incidents in the last few years with lone shooters or terrorist attacks. You can't even ride a bike in a bike path anymore without wondering whether you're going to get run down. So every time something like that happens, unfortunately, we lose people, and then people react and say, oh, by the way, we should have had a barrier up. That's unacceptable. What is acceptable is you take the time now to think through all the potential scenarios you can name, and then start putting together plans in advance as you can afford them, and certainly with the most risky high threat levels, you want to take actions. That's what the book helps guide you through. It's really simple. It's written by an average guy. It's not written by experts. I think that's the problem. When we talk about getting people trained to defend themselves, we're listening to experts, and that's what they do. They defend people after attacks or during attacks. And if you don't call the police and say, hey, I need you to come over and spend the night outside my door because there might be an attack. You call the police when you feel you're being attacked. Okay, now there's the difference. That's a primary difference right there. You have to be accountable for preventing that attack from ever happening, so you never have to call the police. Okay? And I hope this is helpful to you. I hope it's beneficial to you. Pass this on to your friends. Until then, you have some great holidays, but remember, this is a time of soft targets. This is a time where heavy shopping's going on. Churches are holding extra services. People are going to parties and becoming a little inebriated and not as alert as they need to be out in the world in these areas. So just keep yourself alert. Try to at least walk through in your mind things that you would do just in case. For example, if somebody came into a restaurant and started shooting it up, do you know where the exits are when you go into the restaurant? I never go into a restaurant. I don't know where the exits are in that restaurant. I just don't do it anymore. It only takes me about 30 seconds to assess that. But I know where those doors are in case I have to move, or I have to move some friends of mine or my family in that direction. I just do that instinctively. Doesn't alert anybody else, doesn't cause any unnecessary concern by anyone else. It's just something I can do on my own, and I feel more safe and secure when I do it. Okay, so those are some dynamics. I hope you get a lot out of listening to the book. Take some action. Don't wait until you're called to the gym to hear about your children after a shooting. Take some action now. Hold your people accountable who are administering your children's safety and security in school. Ask other people that you attend and trust, your churches, etc. How can they better protect you? Because actually you have children separated from their parents in schools a lot, in churches a lot during church services. So if that's the case, you want to make sure your child's protected. And I know you're in a small town, probably never happened to you, 99% chance it won't, but trust me, there are people out there now that are suffering a long time. They'll be anguishing a long time over what's happened because they never thought it would happen in their little small town. And it's happened. As a matter of fact, several of these school shootings have been in small towns. They haven't been in metropolitan gang areas. Okay, so there's some thoughts to keep in mind. Hope you have great holidays. I want you to have great holidays. Please be alert. Please be safe and secure. And know, everywhere I go, I am going to try to create bad guy free zones for that area. Have a great day.